Monkey D. Luffy's powers are even more insane than we thought. Because you thought it was Sun God, but it was me, Dream God. And Luffy has been using this power since the very beginning of One Piece. However, this is not an ability that he can use alone. And Oda has been very hyper-conscious of it, going all of the way back to East Blue. The ancient being Nika is said to be the warrior of liberation, a being that descends to end the suffering of those who believe in him in the most ridiculous and most rubbisome of ways. And what we tend to focus on is the power of Nika himself. However, the true power source of the Sun God is the will and drive of those who believe in him. Without that, Nika is powerless, and the same is true of Luffy. So you know what, let me give you the most fantastic example in the universe and ask, who was the MVP of Alabasta? Was it Luffy for enduring 3 rounds against a crocodile? Was it Vivi for destroying her voice, stopping the war? Or was it Pell for delivering Luffy and getting rid of that nasty bomb? No, it was none of those. Not the monkey, not the princess, and definitely not the bird. In fact, the MVP of the entire Alabasta arc wasn't even present for the battle at Albana. The MVP that I refer to is Toto, the sole resident of what once was the Uba Oasis, and whose name in the 4Kids dub is Tutu, potentially because they didn't want to risk being sued by the band Toto, you know, the ones that sing Africa with the line about blessing the rains. You know that thing it is that the Toto in One Piece was desperately waiting for? But look, I'm going to put this bluntly. Without Toto, Alabasta falls. It doesn't matter how much Luffy, Vivi, and the rest of the Wacky Hat Gang tried, they would have failed. And it's because without Toto, you lose the heart and the will of the nation of Alabasta. Toto resides in Yuba, and Yuba's symbolism is the heart of Alabasta. It was an oasis built to act as a crossroad between 4 of Alabasta's major cities in the Western Desert. The very existence of Yuba made crossing the desert easier, and it linked all of these cities up. It led to a much more lively and prosperous Alabasta. And that is why Crocodile repeatedly targeted with his sandstorms to shut down that heart and to isolate the rest of the country. And when we visit, Yuba is all dried up. It's a town with no visible hope remaining. Yuba looks like what Alabana would have looked like the day after if Crocodile succeeded. But there is one tiny bit of hope remaining within Yuba's sole resident, Toto, who describes the situation as follows. This wasn't the first sandstorm to hit Yuba. 3 years ago, the land began to dry and the sands began to blow. The desert is at war with Yuba, and little by little, the oasis is losing ground. Quite pessimistic, but then something not that. He proudly declares that Yuba will never surrender to the sands. I'll dig for as long as it takes. And Toto has faith not only in the land, but also in the king of Alabasta. Toto possesses a complete and unshakable belief in Nefertari Cobra, which he conveys to Vivi, whereas everyone else in Yuba, they abandoned the town because they lost faith in the king. But Toto's faith held firm, and so he stayed. And with that minuscule thread of hope, Toto dug and he dug and he dug some more, searching for the water of the oasis. Toto didn't even know this, but at the time he was engaged in a 1v1 with Sir Crocodile. There's a fantastic page during Luffy versus Crocodile where we cut from Toto saying that Yuba is still alive to Crocodile claiming that Yuba will die. And this is where the true battle of Alabasta took place. And it was a brutal struggle, one that we only saw the briefest glimpse of. And in that glimpse, it took Toto all night, but all of that effort later, and what Toto managed to secure was a small mug of water that he gave to Luffy. A token so minor and so seemingly insignificant, but one that would completely change the fate of Alabasta. This small mug of water was that thread of hope, that relentless determination of the nation. And there's a great visual metaphor for the power of this water in round 1 of Luffy vs. Crocodile. When Luffy gets his arm dried out, he drinks some of the Yuba water and his arm regrows to a comically muscular size. But the true moment that Toto saved the entire country comes when Crocodile impales Luffy, and Luffy is finally able to grab that crocodile, all thanks to the water from Yuba wetting his arm. Without this simple moment, Luffy never would have defeated Crocodile, and Alabasta likely wouldn't even exist anymore, as Crocodile did claim that he would reduce the whole country to sand in an effort to find Pluton. And the seed of hope only grows from here. As we go on to manifest the will of Alabasta in the ever so powerful Water Luffy form, and in round 3, Luffy comes up with the idea to use his own monkey blood, which is eventually enough to defeat Crocodile. But it all spawned from Toto's drive not to give in to the desert. That teeny tiny mug of water made all the difference. Toto's resilience saved Alabasta every bit as much as Vivi's drive, Pell's sacrifice, or Luffy's fists. And my favorite moment of celebration after Crocodile's defeat is when we cut back to Toto alone in Yuba, smiling up at the sky as it rains, and he says, just 3 years. That's all it took. Which implies that Toto's will is stronger than I've even given it credit for in this video. The idea of just 3 years makes me believe that Toto would have kept digging for 5, 10, 20, and however many years that his life would allow him. And against a man of that kind of unbreakable determination, Crocodile never stood a chance. Because Crocodile is a man who gave up on his dream after being defeated a single time by Whitebeard. In terms of sheer willpower, Crocodile was completely outclassed by Toto, and that is how Alabasta endured. The way I like to put it is that the people of any given nation in One Piece aren't capable of actually defeating the main threat themselves, but then again, neither is Luffy. And a lot of the time in Kingdom Arc specifically, the story revolves around Luffy and the nation finding that right synergy to come together. And it's that combined willpower that allows Luffy to overcome the enemy. And simultaneously, that combined willpower that allows Luffy to manifest the dreams of the determined ones. And the same was true of Skypiea. When Robin discovers the lost city of Shandora, it has been completely stripped of all of its gold. It is completely nude, scandalous city. This city is the pride and the will of the Shandian tribe. It was what they were seeking to find and protect for the last 400 years in the sky and 400 years before that on the Blue Sea. And what this naughty NL did right was he tried to use their own gold against them by utilizing it as a core component of the Arc Maxim, as well as coating Luffy's arm in the gold to try and avoid fighting him. Robin's hypothesis was that even at the height of Shandora's prosperity, the city's primary goal was to protect its history. And NL foolishly delivers this gold, aka the legacy of Shandora, right to the one person who could use it not only to dispel his island-destroying Uranus wannabe mega weapon, but also to defeat him and ring the funky bell. Much like the water of Yuba, Luffy could not have defeated NL without the gold of Shandora. It was that will and resilience of the Shandian tribe that gave Luffy the power to take NL down. But Skypiea, look, it's a bit more complicated than Alabasta because it has a fair few threads going. And this next one is more intangible, but it's the desire of Luffy to ring the golden bell, which is an act that has had a long and ever-changing meaning in history. For example, the reason why the Shandians originally rang the golden bell was to guide the spirits of their ancestors. However, that reason changed after Nolan's visit, as the Shandians began ringing the bell waiting for Nolan to visit them again to guide him back. And the reason to ring the bell changed once more after Luffy met Mont Blanc Cricket, as Luffy's desire was then to ring the bell to let Cricket know that the truth he'd been searching for this whole time was in the sky. I really want to emphasize that Luffy's main driving force to beat NL on Skypiea is not to beat NL. It's not even to save the island. It's to ring the bell and stop NL from attaining the bell. If I ring the bell, they should be able to hear it. If I don't, they'll just keep searching the ocean floor until they die. There's no way I'm gonna let NL take it. They should be able to hear a bell that big from anywhere. So I'm gonna ring that golden bell. Defeating NL is arguably an incidental event that occurred whilst Luffy was trying to ring the bell. NL got in the way, but there's more than one layer to this. During Skypiea, there's a section where we see 3 kids speaking, and one of them tells about how his father is one of God's divine squad, aka one of the people that NL was forcing to build the Arc Maxim. It's such a random little cutaway, but what it does is humanize the divine squad, who up until this point we've mainly seen as straight up enemies. But it also sets up the final conflict between Luffy and NL, because it's only through the Arc Maxim that we're able to reach the location of the golden bell. So it's not just the will of one party that's contributing here. Alabasta was quite monolithic. We were only looking at one group of people to help there, so we only needed one element, the water of the oasis of Yuba, the heart of Alabasta, if you will, and I will. But on Skypiea, we had 3 separate groups. The descendant of Mont Blanc Noland, who gave Luffy the drive to ring the bell, the Shandian tribe, who gave Luffy the gold to ring the bell, and the citizens of Skypiea, who built the Ark capable of reaching the bell. And again, NL's defeat is more or less incidental, as is the salvation of Skypiea, which might sound odd, but Monkey D. Luffy has always been a man who does big things for such seemingly small reasons. Luffy's main concern isn't that NL's going to destroy the entire island. His main concern is that NL is going after the golden bell. And if he gets it, then Luffy won't have the chance to ring it for Cricket down on the Blue Sea. Luffy is something of a dreamsmith. He specializes in bringing dreams to reality. However, he usually lacks the specific tools to do so, which is why it's up to the dream havers to provide him with those tools, whether it be water on Alabasta, gold on Skypiea, or in the case of Thriller Bark, shadows. I think Thriller Bark showcases this effect about as literally as it gets in One Piece. Charlotte Lola and her crew are members of the Thriller Bark Victims Association, a group of people who have had their shadows stolen by Gecko Moria and have banded together to survive on Thriller Bark. And as part of this, they begin to acquire stray shadows here and there. And in the One Piece world, shadows are separate living entities cast by their solid partners. And the shadows also inherit the personalities of their solids, and therefore the wills of their previous owners. So when the Victims Association insert 100 of these shadows into Luffy to create Nightmare Luffy, this is Luffy being directly fueled by the victims of Gecko Moria. He has been given the power, the skills, and the knowledge he needs to liberate the Victims Association. But in the case of Thriller Bark, the shadows did a lot more than that. Because when Moria uses his ability to absorb all 1,000 shadows for the Shadow's Asgard ability, and thus making him mathematically at least 10 times more powersome than Nightmare Luffy was, it is these shadows that actively hinder him. I don't want to undersell this. These 1,000 shadows turned Gecko Moria into one of the most physically powerful characters we've ever seen in One Piece. The dude was punching islands. However, his mind couldn't handle them all. And after losing command, the shadows rebelled against him. They started escaping, and they gave Luffy the opportunity to defeat Moria right as the sun rose. And a huge part of this was Lola, who was pleading to her shadow to return. A message that was heard and felt not only by her shadow, but by every shadow. And it was all 1,000 victims of Gecko Moria that banded together, rebelled against his control, and allowed Luffy to bring him down. If it was just straight up Luffy versus Moria, this might be controversial, but I think that Luffy would have lost. He had his shadow stolen, and all Moria had to do was last until sunrise, which he very nearly almost did. However, he didn't, because the shadow saved the day. The association reminds me a lot of Toto, actually, because he spent 3 years struggling in the Oasis, whereas the Victims Association spent 3 years trapped in the darkness of a zombie apocalypse. And the Victims Association never gave up hope. They endured the long night, and their will was eventually rewarded by finally allowing them to see their next sunrise. In this case, it's also very tempting to blame Moria himself, his arrogance to think that he could handle that many shadows, but that's really no different from what Crocodile and Enel were doing. All three of these villains were trying to overexert their will on a group of victims, and all three failed, because the collective will of said victims overpowered them. And I should say that this also applies to more Straw Hat focused sagas as well. During any Slobby, Luffy versus Rob Lucci isn't just a 1v1. There are 3 Straw Hats aside from Luffy who are integral to his victory, and Luffy would not have been able to defeat Lucci without. The first was Frankie, the Eni Slobby keybearer. Frankie briefly engages Rob Lucci in a 2v1 alongside Luffy. However, what Frankie gives Luffy is the reassurance that Robin will be free, which allows Luffy to put his full focus on that leopard. Meanwhile, the second crew member was Usopp, who despite having left the Straw Hats, gave Luffy the words he needed to stand up that one last time against Lucci. And finally, of course, we have Nico Robin, who was Luffy's core driving force and gave him what he needed to not fall that one last time before delivering the final blow to Lucci. This instance is definitely a bit more standard shonen, but that's because even though Water 7 is one of the longest stretches of individual stories in One Piece, it's also one of the simplest and about an intercrew conflict. And it's no accident that the 3 emotional centers of this arc, Robin, Usopp, and Frankie, are the ones that contribute to Luffy's victory over Lucci, because this arc was about examining their dreams and desires. So it fell to the 3 of them to give Luffy the tools he needed to make those a reality. And I also want to go over one small but powerful example of this. Back in Arlong Park, originally Nami always cried when seeing Genzo due to his probably scary face. However, Genzo figured out that if he wore a pinwheel on his head, then it would make Nami happy, which is the biggest giveaway that he knew about Nami's deal with Arlong the entire time, because he kept wearing that pinwheel, doing what he could to bring her as much happiness as possible. And this pinwheel becomes another integral tool for Luffy to use. Luffy sees Genzo wearing this pinwheel, completely unaware of what it means to him and by extension what it means to Nami, and Luffy uses that as inspiration to create Gomu Gomu no Pinwheel, a move that he uses in the fight against the Arlong pirates to free Nami and grant the happiness that the pinwheel itself is meant to represent. And of course, the beautiful full stop to this story is that Nami gets that pinwheel tattooed on her arm in the place of the Arlong crew tattoo. But the pinwheel, to me, it's like Toto digging for the water, like Shandian's protecting Shandora, like the Victims Association struggling in the dark, it is a symbol of endurance, one that remained even after Kokoyashi experienced almost a full decade of Arlong's rule. And these symbols are incredibly important because, as stated by Luffy himself, he will not risk his life out of pity. He will only help those who already have the will and drive to help themselves. And it's only through that combination that all of the magic happens. And this is one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of trying to seriously power scale in One Piece, especially when it comes to Luffy, because usually it's not a straight up 1v1 affair. And if it is, a lot of the time, Luffy's actually gonna lose. There are so many opponents that Luffy could lose to and would have been defeated by if not for the direct assistance of those he was fighting on behalf of. Luffy never fights alone. And it's not that Luffy is completely useless without the help of others. It's just that the entire concept of even fighting in the first place becomes meaningless without that collaboration. Luffy is the manifestation of desires, hopes, and dreams of those around him. That is the legend of the sun god Nika. And if you give him the tools, then mate, he will build you a dream. Water to propagate Alabasta, gold to preserve the history of Shandora, and even a pinwheel to kick a shark in the dick. Whatever your dream is, he will make it a reality, but only if you're prepared to give everything to make it happen as well.